welcome to you, Bjarke, and tell us everything about Storyplanet.
Yep. Tell us everything about Storyplanet. That's an interesting brief. Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me. Thanks to Kasper for making this amazing thing grow year after year and really pushing what we all have the big issue about, which is these nonlinear interactive things. I think this is going to be a talk a little bit about my journey from when I started with this. And what really got me into it was this many parallel things that happened at the same time. I was working as a writer on a Danish newspaper, and I was really tired of constantly doing news, and I wanted to get into narrative journalism. But that's really hard if you haven't really worked in the industry for 20 years and so on. So I discovered that the internet might be a place where I could find a little niche to do these things. And at the same time, all these amazing tools were coming out, Flash and iMovie, and you could basically do a lot of things yourself. You didn't have to rely on a big media outlet to do it. And then the third thing that happened was I started looking at the internet and sort of realizing that there were really like a strong potential for doing narrative things that weren't really being used. The language weren't really being used. So here we're back in around 2000. So this is like ages ago in internet time. And back then, if you all remember, it was very static, very factual, very text-based. And I remember discovering with the Danish photographer, we did a video and we put it online, and we was like, "Whoa, video works really great on a computer." And now it sounds ridiculous, but back then it was a revelation that you could do stuff like that. And it led me to this mission that's been my mission ever since, which is to try to define some. Now I got to read what my mission actually is, but it's creating better narrative formats for the internet, basically. I think there's a huge potential for creating these stories that speak to the heart and not just the brain. So when you read a news article, you get these factual points, but when you see a really great web project, it speaks to the heart. And then from there on, I think Andrew DeVigo early on today had a really good quote about showing me a story, but to really remember something, you have to feel it first. So of course the whole idea of a narrative has changed a little bit, and I think one of the really interesting discussions is the balance between all these fractal things that we see with video bits and pieces and nice interfaces, and then creating an actual narrative, and how much can you break it down without losing the narrative, and do you even need to have a narrative and all these things. Now I'm already going out on a side branch because that wasn't really what I was supposed to talk about. Let me just see if I can get this thing going. Yeah. So one of the first things I started to discover is this idea of side branches, or adding depth to your story. So you can have a main story, which is what you always have, and how we know it from TV and radio and print. But with the internet, you can actually let people select things and go deeper into things, and you can do this in many different ways. But one of the problems as a storyteller, as probably most of you know, is that we always have these side branches that we have to cut out. But you don't have to do that with the internet, and you can cater to different interests. So if you have a 5-minute interview, one person might be very interested in one little segment, and another one might be interested in another little segment. But with the internet, you can actually let people dive into these segments. There are a lot of great examples of that here. We have the Ajax story, where it's a story about Iran. You can watch it out here, about the development and the sort of downfall of Iranian democracy, and that's the main story. But then there's a lot of additional documents and footnotes and characters and stuff that you can go into. So I think that's a pretty interesting possibility. And the other thing was the notion of multimedia. So actually mixing up all these different things. And of course, you've almost from the birth of the internet been doing these things, but in the new kind of formats, it's really a very tightly knit thing that works together. So you can have maybe a linear video, and then at certain points you can dive into articles, and of course you have a mix of photography and all that. I mean, personally, I actually quite hate the word multimedia because I think it's nothing new. I mean, a slideshow in the old days was also multimedia, but I think the new thing is that it's very tightly integrated. So to show you an example of one of the first projects I came up with in 2002 was this project called The Enemy Within that I did with a Danish photographer and another journalist. It's about Russian soldiers that went to the war in Chechnya and what happens when they come back and what actually make them do all the terrible things they did. But I programmed the whole thing and designed it myself in Flash, and I have had my friends help me with the research, and we went to Moscow and shot images and all these things. And a lot of the principles I used in that story I've actually been using ever since. So let's see a little bite of it. So there's 4 linear chapters. That's the structure. And then in between there's these islands of things that you can go into.
Это
So you can see who's talking, and I forgot to
это уже офицеры,
translate
они
who's
когда
talking.
пьяные напивались, и ради отвлечения они так вот, им было просто весело, допустим, заставить солдата то, что он не может сделать, а потом за это вот так палкой ударить, это значит наказание такое сделать.
So then you can click and you get to this section where there's a lot of, so this was all the research materials that we had. So instead of just creating the linear story, we collected all these things.
More terrible.
So there's additional audio interviews, there's timelines, there's I think even interactive maps, and all these things like extra material on the story. And it looks pretty simple now, but back then it was like technically really a big nightmare to produce because we had to load all these different things in and try to sequence them into a movie and so on. That's a timeline. So that was 2002, and back then the way the production time was actually divided was that we used a little tiny fraction actually doing the great storytelling and the interviews and all that, and the big bulk of time was like solving these bullshit Flash problems where you had a little comma that you had to change to another punctuation, and then the whole thing would work, and otherwise it wouldn't. So already back then I was frustrated by all the technology you had to, all the bulk of tech you had to learn to do these things. I mean, at the same time it was really great that you could do it yourself, and we won an award in the US called the Online News Awards, and I remember being there on a panel, and they asked me, so who is your programming team? And I was like, that was me. And everybody was really shocked at it because they were big media corporations and they were used to big teams. So on one hand, it was great that you could do all this, but it's also really difficult to be on the edge of all that programming. And one of the ways we were doing it with Flash was we were creating these storyboards where it was actually a paper representation of the Flash timeline, where we had little things with sticky tack on this chewing gum kind of thing on the back, little things that we could move around and decide where to place the images and so on. So it was very analog in a way, the way we were doing it. So after producing a few more projects, in 2004, or actually in 2003, but it didn't happen until 2004, I got contacted by Magnum. Magnum Photos, for you, those of you who don't know it, is this great 60-year-old photo agency, a little over 60 years, photo agency in New York and Paris and London. And they asked me in New York if I wanted to come there and try to help them create something for online, because they didn't have a whole lot of stuff online. They've been producing photos for Time and Newsweek and these big print publications and for exhibitions and so on. So of course that was a really great opportunity, I thought, because they had an amazing archive of images, and I could help them do something with that. So the scope of that thing was, first of all, to get the archive, sort of make it come alive again. And then, of course, also to try to find a way to make new revenue. So we all know that the print industry and the traditional media industry is a little bit under pressure, and that was the clients of Magnum. So they needed to find another way of making money, and of course to stir up some buzz about the whole photo thing, basically. And then one of my main big personal missions was to invent all these new nonlinear formats, because I was a big believer in nonlinear, I still am, and I really wanted to see if we could do that at Magnum. And to a large extent, I mean, we managed to do the three first things, but we actually really failed at nonlinear, which is a bit ironic, because that was sort of why I came to Magnum, and they saw my nonlinear pieces and wanted me to do something like that. But it never really happened, and I'm going to get into why it didn't, but let me just show you a few examples of what we were working on. So this was like a little piece, and one of the very first ones we did with Larry Towell.
Come on in. Sit down. Join me for a coffee break.
So you can see it's actually a little nonlinear because we have chapters. Oh, I love this pointer. It's the first time I'm using it. And you have chapters here, and you have these shortcuts where you can go and see his camera back and stuff like that. So it was a little nonlinear, and you have some text down here. Yeah, let's just see a little more.
A homemade shrine marks the spot someone died in a car crash at the turnoff on Highway 49. Here, Catholicism ends. The air trembles with a mouthful of cactus needles and dry branches. Brambles hold the earth together with dead fingers. Across a field of shadows, dust rises behind the tractor of a man who is married to the earth and to this place. He stops and climbs down to the field with arms uplifted. He dances like a scarecrow.
So we started out a little nonlinear, but then we actually ended up with a totally linear video format. Let me just show you a little piece of an Indian coverage.
అంటే ఇద్దరం ఒకలాగా ఉంటే ఒకరికొకరు ధైర్యం చెప్పకపోతే మాకు ఇంకెవరు ధైర్యం చెప్తారు.
I'm just going to move on, but I mean, you can all see these if you Google Magnum in motion. You're going to get to the side. But the reason why we got pushed out of the nonlinear was, first of all, video became really great online. I mean, Flash video took off, and it became high quality. You could actually do the same kind of quality. Before, we had been forced, more or less, to load in single images because that was the only way you could really make images look nice. by the way, a little footnote, my first project, the one you saw from Russia, was 20 minutes long. It had video, it had images. And back then, people were saying, this is way, way too big, and people can never see it. It's way too much to download. And recently, I looked at it. The whole project is 10 megabytes. So it says something about how, things change. But suddenly, you could stream, 200 megabyte videos and all these things. So, which meant you could actually have somebody put together a video in Final Cut, export it as a QuickTime, and put it online, which was much, much easier than having to dynamically write something that loaded into Flash and try to sync it up with sound and stuff like that. So that changed the whole production workflow. And then, and it really shifted the balance between nonlinear and linear, because nonlinear was still really cumbersome and expensive, and it took long to produce, and the number of viewers wasn't much greater than linear. So of course the people behind these who was financing this stuff also said, why should we use twice the money and time on something that we don't get more viewers for? And it ties into a little bit about the selling and syndication. So one of the ways we were making money at Magnum, with Magnum in Motion, was to syndicate it to partners. So Newsweek and Slate Magazine and other online outlets would buy our pieces, and we would split the ad revenue. And with just giving them a video file was much easier than having them try to embed a whole interactive piece, and it would maybe be branded because you had an interface around it that was branded in our design, and they wanted their own design and all this. So the whole financial and the whole business model was really not catering that well at that time to nonlinear. So we got pushed into this thing. But that led me to, from the very beginning, I showed you the graph of Flash bullshit. I've had this idea that we needed to create a tool that would make it easier for us to produce these things. And this pushed me to finally actually say, okay, let's do it. Because I had been waiting for somebody to do it, and nobody had actually done it. So I decided to go ahead and start building this tool, which led to Storyplanet. So it was really going back to my mission that we needed better formats, better narrative formats. But I saw one of the main barriers being that we didn't have a tool that made it fast and easy. So first of all, I needed to sort of sketch out the whole thing, which was actually the easy part because I was a user myself, so I kind of knew the requirements. On the other hand, the really hard thing is to do something that's flexible, so we can have all these crazy different ideas and all produce them in this tool and still make it really easy to use. And so the other thing is that I needed to raise money and then put a team together, and I got a couple of investors. But the hard part is, and we're still struggling a bit with this, is that it's not really that commercial an idea. It's we don't just want people to put a bunch of lolcats up there. We want people to do meaningful stuff. So it's hard to get people to invest in this. And now I gotta hurry up. I'm only in 2009. But in 2010 we launched the first version, which was pretty video editing like still with these timelines and so on, and we discovered that it was actually still really hard to do stuff. Now we sort of took out some of the stuff from the equation, but now we still needed to. People were still really frustrated with dealing with our system because it wasn't as easy as we had hoped for. So now it was not the Flash bullshit. Now it was our editor bullshit. So some of the things we changed was instead of making just a tool, we've now been working along the path of doing this open platform where developers can do their own plugins and extensions and really make it flexible. Then instead of making it an actual editing tool, we're trying to more do an assembly tool. So once you have edited your video in Final Cut or whatever you use, and build some kind of interface elements, you can combine it all and assemble it in Storyplanet. And then, we got all this user feedback, and we've been trying to cater to that. So one of the scenarios we came up with to make it flexible was this idea of a grid and tiles in the grid. And this is actually a little before the iPad. But when the iPad came out, I was really blown away because I could see how it would work with like moving back and forth, left and right, and up and down. So we've stuck to this, and this is what we have now. We launched in April, which is we have these two building sort of views. We have a grid view where you can build your story structure out of tiles, and you can do a story with side branches, or you can do a story with different directions, all these things. And then we have a canvas view, which is where you assemble all your things. So you upload your photos and your videos, and you can add text boxes, and you can add hotspots on top that is invisible buttons that can go make you navigate the story different ways. And we plan on, so the next step is we want to open it up so you can build all these widgets. So if somebody wants to do a 360-degree image or whatever, you can build that. You can have a developer build that, and you can use it. So it becomes more of a framework. So I think where we've gotten to is that we now have really a pretty big chunk is creating the content and the storytelling. So we've gotten a bigger chunk of that, and we still have you know, a little bit of frustration of doing the online thing. There's a lot of stuff that's not fast enough. You know, we want to be able to copy paste a whole bunch of things between stories and all these things. So there's still a little frustration there, but we've come a long way. So 30 seconds more and then I'm done. So we're opening it up now. That's the next step, to have it more community driven. And we're also right now only browser based. So we're gonna focus much more on tablets and smartphones, which is, I think, really where we want to be. And our goal is to really get to a point where there's a big chunk of fun with or you know, creating the stories, and then there's a little chunk that's still fun. It's not frustrating, but it's fun to build the actual interface in the tool. So I think that's my 15 minutes.